I never thought a single afternoon could unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. The memory of it feels like sunlight filtered through a cracked window, warm but painfully distorted. It started the moment I stepped into my sister's room, a room I had always considered off-limits, sacred in its pink-tinged softness. I thought I was there for a quick favor, to fetch something she forgot downstairs, but her clothes, lying so casually across her chair, seemed to pulse with a strange invitation. I remember pausing, hand hovering over a silky blouse, feeling the delicate brush of its fabric against my fingers. It wasn't just clothing, it was an unspoken promise, a whisper that made my chest tighten in ways I couldn't name. I laughed nervously, telling myself I was just being silly, yet the pull was undeniable. That afternoon, curiosity collided with an unfamiliar shyness, and before I knew it, I was holding one of her soft skirts against myself, imagining how it would feel to wear it. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, eyes wide, uncertain, yet captivated. I felt exposed and exhilarated all at once, like I was teetering on the edge of something both forbidden and deeply intimate. Then she walked in. My sister, usually so warm and teasing, caught me in that suspended moment. Instead of scolding, she simply smiled, an enigmatic curl of amusement at the corner of her lips, and said, "I knew you." Notice. That simple acknowledgement, that quiet acceptance, unlocked something inside me I didn't even know was waiting. She helped me slip into the blouse, adjusted the skirt, and I was swallowed by a vulnerability so profound it brought tears to my eyes. Not shame. No, this was different. It was recognition, a strange kind of homecoming inside someone else's life, a world painted in fabric softer than my own skin had ever known. Hours passed, though I could not tell how many. I experimented, fumbled, laughed at my own awkwardness, and every glance in the mirror revealed more than just a reflection. It revealed possibilities. The silhouette of her clothes transformed my frame, reshaping my posture, my walk, even the tone of my voice. Every change, subtle yet undeniable, sent tremors through my sense of self. I was no longer just me, yet not entirely her. I existed in that liminal space where boundaries blurred and the notion of normal seemed irrelevant. By evening, the room felt sacred. I wasn't hiding. I was discovering, and the emotional weight of it pressed against me like a tide I didn't want to resist. For the first time, I realized that who I appeared to be, the identity I had always clung to, wasn't the only story I could live. The soft sway of the skirt as I moved, the whisper of fabric along my skin, the strange thrill of someone noticing me differently, it was intoxicating. It scared me. It exhilarated me. And in that quiet, transformative twilight, I understood that nothing would ever feel entirely the same again. The following morning, I woke with a strange weight on my chest, as though the soft fabrics of my sister's room had wrapped themselves around my very thoughts overnight. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the memory of her smile and the touch of her clothes pressing into me like an echo I couldn't shake. There was no shame yet, not exactly. It was more complicated, a strange tension between exhilaration and fear. My mind churned. Who was I if I allowed myself to explore this? Could I ever go back to the version of me who ignored the allure of delicate fabrics, the subtle curve of a blouse over my shoulders, the soft sway of a skirt brushing against my legs? The questions swirled like smoke, intangible and persistent. I found myself slipping out of bed, drawn again to the mirror. The morning sunlight spilled across the floor, catching on the edge of a blouse I had left draped over a chair. My hands reached for it almost automatically, and the familiar shiver ran down my spine as I lifted it, felt the gentle texture against my fingers. I hesitated, then held it to my body. My reflection stared back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, a mixture of fascination and fear. Even in the bright light of day, I could see the changes already beginning, not in my body exactly, but in the way I held myself. My shoulders softened, my posture shifted instinctively. There was a rhythm to it, a subtle ballet of gestures that felt both foreign and right. I didn't hear the door open. I barely noticed my sister standing there until she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to hide it, you know." That simple sentence was like a key turning in a lock inside me. My breath caught. I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, and even saying it out loud felt like shedding an old skin. She stepped closer, and with gentle hands, she helped me adjust the blouse, smoothing the fabric over my chest, letting me feel the slight weight and texture in a way I never had before. There was a deliberate intimacy to it, not sexual, but profoundly personal. She wasn't just helping me dress. She was guiding me into an entirely new understanding of myself. Time lost meaning that day. I tried on skirt after skirt, blouse after blouse, sometimes laughing at how ridiculous I felt, sometimes crying quietly because the sensations were overwhelming. My reflection changed with each attempt, my expression becoming more animated, more alive. There was an odd comfort in seeing my own face framed by her clothes, in watching the subtle shift of my shoulders, the tilt of my neck, the softening of my jawline under the right light. For the first time, I considered that perhaps I wasn't trying to become someone else. Perhaps I was finally seeing who I had always been, hidden beneath layers of expectation and habit. And yet, fear was never far behind. I imagined walking down the street like this, passing neighbors, friends, colleagues, anyone who knew me. Would they see me? Would they laugh? Would they understand? That tension gnawed at me, even as my heart leapt with a strange joy every time I glanced in the mirror. I caught myself in moments of hesitation, tugging at a sleeve, adjusting a hem, trying to reconcile the person I was with the person I wanted to explore. Every reflection was a question, every shadow a challenge. By late afternoon, I felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration I could hardly describe. My sister had left me alone for a while, giving me space to experiment, to explore, to fumble with buttons and zippers, to marvel at the way a skirt could change the sway of my hips or the way a soft blouse could make my shoulders seem lighter. I remember twirling slowly in front of the mirror, laughing quietly at the sheer absurdity and beauty of it all. I felt fragile, yet invincible in some inexplicable way. The clothes weren't just garments. They were a lens, refracting me into something both familiar and astonishingly new. The day blurred into evening, and I finally heard footsteps approaching again. My sister returned with a basket of more clothes, including shoes I had never imagined wearing. I froze for a moment, anxiety and anticipation tangling inside me. "Try these," she said gently, holding out a pair of flats and a soft cardigan. My hands trembled as I took them, and I realized with a mix of fear and excitement that I was starting to crave this exploration, even if it terrified me. I spent hours trying to coordinate outfits, pairing skirts and blouses, experimenting with textures and colors, learning the subtle art of movement and posture. My reflection became a teacher, my sister a guide, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to see beauty in my own body that I had never recognized before. The softness of the fabrics taught me softness in myself. The gentle sway of a skirt taught me grace. Every carefully adjusted fold and drape of clothing was a lesson in identity, in discovering that who I was could be both complex and fluid, delicate and strong at the same time. That night, I lay in bed with her blouse folded neatly beside me, the scent faint but comforting, and I realized that my sense of self had shifted irreversibly. The fear remained, a quiet undercurrent, but the exhilaration was louder, persistent, insistent. I thought about tomorrow, about showing the world even a fragment of what I had discovered, and a part of me quivered in anticipation. For the first time, I understood that this journey wasn't about imitation or disguise. It was about revelation, about peeling back the layers I had always hidden beneath, and allowing something new and vibrant to emerge. Sleep came slowly, as it always does when the mind is alight with discovery. And in that quiet half-conscious state, I dreamt of fabric and movement, of colors that felt like feelings, of a reflection that was no longer a stranger but a companion, waiting patiently for me to step fully into the light. I awoke the next morning knowing that my life had changed forever. The journey had only begun, and I was terrified and exhilarated to continue. The morning sun seeped through the curtains in a way that made everything feel simultaneously tender and urgent. I woke with a heaviness in my chest, one part anticipation, one part dread. The previous day's discoveries were still fresh, clinging to me like a second skin, yet the thought of stepping out of my sister's sanctuary filled me with an inexplicable terror. What if someone saw? What if they knew? But beneath the fear, a spark of excitement persisted, defiant and insistent, urging me to embrace this new self I was only beginning to recognize. I swung my legs out of bed and found the blouse I had slept with still folded neatly on my nightstand. its soft fabric whispering against my fingers. I dressed slowly, deliberately, savoring each movement. Buttoning the blouse, smoothing the skirt over my hips, adjusting the hem until it sat just right. Each gesture was a meditation, a subtle declaration that this was mine, this self that had been waiting quietly beneath the surface. I caught sight of myself in the mirror and froze, breath catching. I wasn't just my old self with borrowed clothes. My posture, my gestures, even the tilt of my chin had shifted. There was a strange grace to the way I held myself, a quiet elegance I hadn't known I possessed. And yet, behind the reflection, uncertainty lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder that the world outside might not understand. My sister appeared at the door with a smile that was equal parts reassurance and challenge. "Ready?" she asked. Her tone carried no judgment, only encouragement, and that small affirmation gave me courage I didn't realize I was lacking. Together, we walked toward the door, and the hallway suddenly felt impossibly vast, the air heavy with potential exposure. My pulse quickened, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat in my chest. The moment I stepped out into the light, I became acutely aware of the world's gaze, of the invisible currents of expectation and perception swirling around me. We walked down the street, my sister guiding me, subtly adjusting the skirt, smoothing my hair, and I felt a mixture of protection and exhilaration. Passers-by glanced, but their looks were fleeting, and I realized that the terror I had built in my mind was often far larger than reality. Still, the anxiety lingered beneath the surface, a constant hum in my ears. Every reflection in shop windows, every mirrored surface, became both a temptation and a test. Could I hold myself steady? Could I inhabit this self without faltering? The answer, I discovered, was not instantaneous. It came in fragments. A subtle tilt of my head here, a small smile there, a moment of eye contact with a stranger that didn't terrify me as much as I feared. Back home, the evening brought a deeper, more intimate confrontation with myself. Alone in my room, I experimented with hairstyles, learned the delicate art of folding and layering fabrics, and studied my reflection with a critical yet tender eye. Every subtle adjustment revealed a layer of myself I hadn't seen before, the curve of my neck, the softness of my shoulders, the way light caught the gentle swell of a blouse. And with each discovery came an avalanche of emotions. Wonder, guilt, excitement, shame, and joy all intertwined in a chaotic symphony I could neither control nor resist. But the social world loomed larger than my private explorations. The next day, I faced a small but terrifying experiment, walking to the corner store dressed in one of my sister's outfits. The short journey felt like stepping onto a stage, every passerby a potential judge, every reflected window a jury. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the strap of my bag, my heart hammering with each step. And yet, something remarkable happened. As I walked, I began to notice subtle shifts in the way people interacted with me, noticing smiles that were warmer, greetings that felt lighter, eyes that lingered not with judgment but with curiosity. It was intoxicating, yet terrifying, because it challenged everything I had believed about how I existed in the world. When I returned, my sister's expression was a mixture of pride and something softer, almost maternal. "You did it," she said simply. And in that affirmation, I felt a tidal wave of relief, validation, and an unspoken challenge. The journey wasn't just about clothing or appearance. It was about learning to navigate the world as someone I had only recently begun to understand. Each outing, each encounter, became both a test and a lesson, revealing vulnerabilities I had never confronted, but also strengths I didn't know I possessed. Days bled into weeks, and the process deepened. I learned to move with intention, to walk with the subtle grace imparted by skirts and soft fabrics, to carry myself in ways that felt both natural and deliberately transformative. I discovered the power of voice modulation, the delicate art of soft gestures, the subtle confidence that comes from inhabiting a self fully realized even when the world may not fully accept it. And through it all, the emotional landscape shifted. Guilt and fear gave way slowly to curiosity, wonder, and a quiet, insistent pride. I began to journal secretly, documenting each moment, each sensation, each victory and defeat, as though tracing the evolution of a new species emerging from my own body. Yet tension never disappeared. There were moments when self-doubt crashed over me like waves, days when a mirror seemed merciless, when the fabric that usually felt comforting now felt suffocating, when I questioned the very validity of this journey. I remember one evening, sitting on the edge of my bed, a blouse tangled in my fingers, tears streaming unbidden, whispering to myself, "Who am I really?" The answer didn't come immediately. It took hours of reflection, of sitting with the discomfort, of acknowledging that identity isn't a fixed point but a fluid, evolving process. And slowly, the tension softened, replaced by something sturdier, a quiet conviction that this exploration was not a whim, not a game, but a necessary path toward self-understanding. The psychological metamorphosis was mirrored in every external change. I noticed the way my posture had softened, the way my hands moved with new deliberation, the way my eyes lingered differently on the world. My sister continued to guide me, introducing me to subtle techniques for presenting myself confidently, for navigating public spaces without fear, for embracing the delicate power in softness. And as I practiced, experimented, and refined, I began to feel an astonishing sense of alignment between my inner world and my outward presentation, a harmony I had never experienced in all my years of hiding behind conventions and expectations. One evening, a small but profound turning point arrived. I was preparing for bed, examining my reflection in the dim light, when I realized I was smiling at myself, not a tentative, questioning smile, but one of genuine recognition. For the first time, I didn't see a disguise, an experiment, or a borrowed identity. I saw someone real, fragile yet resilient, cautious yet daring, someone who had emerged from the shadows of doubt and expectation into a light all their own. And in that moment, a quiet clarity settled over me. The journey would be long, fraught with obstacles and uncertainties, but it was mine entirely. I slept that night with a serenity I had never known, though tinged with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The world outside, with its unpredictable reactions, its potential judgments, and its subtle cruelties, awaited. But inside, I felt an unshakable foundation forming, a realization that who I was discovering was not less than anyone else, not an aberration, but a genuine and beautiful self waiting patiently to be lived fully. And as dreams of flowing fabrics and mirrored reflections carried me into sleep, I knew, with a certainty I had never felt before, that I was ready to step further into this life, to test its boundaries, to claim it as my own, and to face the world with both courage and vulnerability intertwined. The next morning, I woke with a fluttering anxiety I could barely name. It wasn't just about the clothes anymore. It was about the world outside, the unpredictable eyes of strangers, the whispered judgments I imagined at every corner. My reflection in the mirror was familiar now, almost comforting, but the thought of stepping beyond my sister's guidance made my stomach twist. And yet, a quiet excitement undercut the fear. I could feel the pulse of possibility, the allure of exploration, and the intoxicating idea that the world might, just might, accept me for who I was becoming. I dressed meticulously, as if each fold, each crease, each careful brush of hair over my shoulders could armor me against the unknown. My sister watched silently, her expression unreadable, but there was something almost reverent in the way she handed me the cardigan and adjusted my skirt. "You're ready," she said softly. I nodded, unsure if it was true, but her faith lent me a fragile courage I clung to like a lifeline. I stepped outside, the sunlight sharper than I remembered, illuminating every detail of the street, every shadow, every fleeting glance. Each step felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, and I could feel the rhythm of my heart matching the sway of my skirt, the subtle grace of my movement. The first encounter came faster than expected. A neighbor waved as I passed. My breath caught, and my hand instinctively went to the strap of my bag, clutching it like a shield. But the wave was friendly, casual, unremarkable, and in that moment I realized how much I had amplified my own fears. I forced myself to relax, to match the rhythm of the world instead of resisting it. The sensation was dizzying and liberating at the same time, a realization that living in this self was not inherently dangerous, not inherently shameful. It was simply different, and difference, I discovered, had its own quiet power. Returning home, I found a note slipped under my door. My sister's handwriting, familiar and comforting, yet the words carried weight. "You are stronger than you know. Keep moving forward." I felt a shiver of gratitude, but also a deeper awareness. This wasn't just an experiment anymore. This was a journey with consequences, risks, and revelations. The note was a subtle reminder that every choice I made, every step I took outside, would shape not only how the world saw me, but how I saw myself. The days that followed were a whirlwind of small but profound encounters. I went to the local market, carefully choosing outfits that balanced visibility and comfort, feeling every eye that glanced in my direction. Some looks were curious, others indifferent, a few outright dismissive. But over time, I began to notice a subtle change in my own perception. I wasn't shrinking from judgment anymore. I was observing, learning, and even feeling a quiet pride in how far I had come. The mirror at home reflected not just my appearance, but a growing confidence, fragile but persistent, delicate yet unyielding. And then came the first real challenge, a casual outing with friends who had known me only in my previous, strictly masculine form. I remember the moment vividly. We were meeting for coffee at a small cafe, laughter filling the space as I approached the table. My chest tightened, palms slick with nervous sweat. How would they react? Could I truly inhabit this self in front of people who knew me only as someone else? The initial reactions were subtle, almost imperceptible. A pause, a double take, a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. My heart raced, and I felt the old fears rising, a tidal wave of self-doubt threatening to pull me under. But then I reminded myself of the lessons of the past weeks, the rhythm of my movements, the careful grace, the soft strength I had cultivated in solitude. I smiled, lifted my chin, and spoke. The words felt different, lighter, more fluid. My friends' expressions shifted from surprise to curiosity, some smiles tentative, others warmer, more accepting. It wasn't total acceptance, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. And in that acknowledgement, I found a courage I hadn't known I possessed. I realized that the world could challenge me, could make me stumble, but it could not erase the work I had done inside myself, the identity I was slowly claiming with every choice, every gesture, every breath. Evenings were often spent in deep reflection, alone in my room with the soft fabrics that had become both armor and companion. I experimented endlessly with combinations, textures, and subtle movements, learning how the sway of a skirt could change not just the perception of my body, but my own sense of rhythm and confidence. My voice, once casual and clipped, began to take on nuances I hadn't known it could carry, soft, deliberate, resonant in ways that felt like discovery. Each gesture, each detail became a meditation, a study of self that demanded attention, patience, and empathy. But growth was never linear. There were moments when the fear came roaring back, when a reflection in a shop window made me wince, when imagined whispers of strangers threatened to erode the fragile self-assurance I had built. I remember one particularly painful evening, standing in the bathroom mirror, tears streaming, clutching a blouse to my chest, whispering, "Why is this so hard? Why can't I just be me?" The answer didn't come immediately, but slowly, with patient insistence, I realized that difficulty didn't signal failure. It signaled authenticity. The struggle itself was a testament to the depth of the transformation I was experiencing. And yet, even amid the challenges, there were moments of pure, unadulterated joy. I remember the first time I walked down a crowded street and felt truly invisible, not in the sense of being overlooked, but in the sense of being unafraid, fully inhabiting the self I had constructed, moving through the world with grace and quiet confidence. I smiled to myself, aware that the soft sway of my skirt, the gentle curve of my blouse, the careful framing of my hair, all contributed to a presence that was undeniably mine. It was intoxicating, and in that intoxication lay a profound truth. I was not merely experimenting with appearance. I was discovering an essential, undeniable part of my identity. The social experiments continued. I ventured into spaces I had once avoided, the bookstore, the cafe, even the local library. Each outing was both test and triumph. Each interaction, from the barista's casual greeting to the clerk's polite inquiry, became a lesson in self-presentation and emotional resilience. And through it all, my sister remained my anchor, a silent guide whose presence reinforced the knowledge that I was allowed to exist as I was, to explore, to falter, and to rise again. By the end of that month, I realized something astonishing. I was no longer just trying on a new self. The clothes, the gestures, the movements, they had seeped into my very being. My identity had expanded, layered over the foundation of who I had always been, enriched with the delicate textures of softness, grace, and self-awareness. The fear remained, always lurking in the corners, but it had lost its dominion over me. I could now face the world with eyes wide open, aware of both danger and beauty, and move forward with an authenticity that was no longer optional but essential. That night, I lay in bed with the moonlight casting gentle shadows across my room. The reflection in the window caught my eye, and I saw not a borrowed identity, not an experiment, but someone alive, complex, and undeniably real. The journey was far from over, the social challenges still looming, the inner conflicts still unresolved, but for the first time I felt equipped to navigate both worlds. The private sanctuary of self-discovery and the vast, unpredictable theater of public perception. And as sleep claimed me, I carried with me a quiet conviction. I was no longer running from fear. I was stepping into life, clothed in both fabric and courage, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act between exhilaration and fear, between the thrill of discovery and the sharp edge of vulnerability. Every morning I woke with a pulse of anticipation that sometimes felt electric, other times terrifying. I had learned to dress myself with precision, each fold, each seam, each texture carefully chosen to reflect the self I was nurturing. But the outside world was unpredictable, and the unpredictability gnawed at me. Every glance from a stranger, every subtle whisper in a cafe or store, became a test of my courage, a reminder that the stakes were real, that this was not merely private experimentation anymore. One morning, I decided to push myself further. I had never dared to attend a small gathering of acquaintances fully dressed in the feminine persona I had been cultivating, fearing judgment, mockery, or worse, rejection. But something inside me demanded it, a voice quiet yet insistent, whispering that growth existed only beyond the boundaries of fear. I spent hours preparing, selecting a skirt that swayed gracefully with every step, a blouse soft enough to soothe my own anxieties, a cardigan that framed my shoulders gently. I brushed and styled my hair until each strand felt like an extension of my own self. And finally, I looked into the mirror and did something I had never done before. I smiled without reservation, without the hesitation that had once defined every reflection. The journey to the gathering was a crucible. With each step, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, that mix of vulnerability and exhilaration that had become my constant companion. My hands trembled slightly, my heart hammering against my ribcage, yet I forced myself to maintain the rhythm of my movements, the deliberate grace I had practiced in solitude. Each passerby, each reflection, became both a challenge and a revelation. I began to notice something subtle but profound. People's gazes did not linger with judgment as often as I feared. Some were curious, some indifferent, a few even smiled. And for the first time, I realized that much of my anxiety had been internal, constructed from assumptions, projections, and fear. At the gathering, I was met with a complex mixture of reactions. Some acquaintances struggled to reconcile this new version of me with the person they had known. Their eyes widened in surprise, subtle tension threaded through their smiles, but there was no mockery, no cruelty. My initial panic began to ebb as I spoke, as I allowed my voice, soft, deliberate, resonant, to carry my words. I realized that my presence alone, carefully curated yet authentically me, was a form of communication, a declaration that I existed in this form and would not shrink to fit old expectations. Yet the emotional tension remained. Every compliment, every cautious nod, every hesitant question tugged at a fragile core of self-doubt. I questioned my right to inhabit this identity, my legitimacy, my authenticity. Late that night, back in my sanctuary, I stood before the mirror and let the tears flow freely. I whispered into the quiet room, "Am I allowed to be this, to exist like this in the world?" The question felt simultaneously naive and profound. I remembered my sister's quiet reassurance, the way she had guided me, and yet the journey was mine alone, the struggle mine to endure. Weeks passed in a rhythm of experimentation, triumph, and occasional heartbreak. I began to explore subtler aspects of femininity, the tilt of the head, the softness of a hand gesture, the cadence of speech, the sway of the hips that felt both natural and newly learned. Each practice was an act of meditation, a negotiation between who I had been and who I was becoming. And yet, no amount of preparation could insulate me from moments of acute vulnerability. Moments when a reflection in a shop window startled me, when a casual remark from a stranger cut deeper than intended, when I caught a glimpse of my own uncertainty mirrored back at me. One afternoon, a particularly jarring encounter shook me. I had stepped into a bookstore, feeling confident, graceful even, when someone I had known in my previous life approached. Their expression shifted from recognition to confusion in an instant, their voice laced with hesitation. The old panic surged, but this time I did something I had never done before. I maintained my composure, allowed my smile to be genuine, and engaged fully as the person before me, not as a version of myself I thought they expected, but as the self I was learning to inhabit. The conversation was awkward, the pauses long, but when it ended, I felt a quiet triumph. I had navigated a delicate social minefield and emerged unbroken. And in that triumph, I glimpsed the deeper truth. This journey was not about perfection, but about resilience, about the courage to exist authentically even when the world is uncertain. The psychological landscape continued to evolve. Sleep became restless with dreams of reflection and identity, of imagined judgments and subtle triumphs. I would wake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing with emotions I could barely untangle. I realized that this journey had reshaped me in ways I could not have anticipated, not just in appearance, but in thought, in perception, in the very rhythm of my being. My body had learned new movements, my voice new cadences, my mind new perspectives, and yet the core question, "Who am I?" remained, echoing in the quietest moments, demanding introspection and courage. Despite the intensity, there were moments of breathtaking beauty. A quiet afternoon spent wandering a park, the sunlight dancing across the skirts I now wore with ease. A fleeting smile from a stranger that felt like acknowledgement rather than judgment. A moment of private triumph when I mastered a gesture or a stance that once felt impossible. All these instances became sacred touchstones, reminders that transformation was both arduous and exhilarating, painful and luminous. But the journey also revealed the fragility of identity. One evening, a casual remark from a friend triggered a cascade of doubt. I retreated to my room, the soft fabrics around me both comforting and constraining. I held a blouse to my chest, staring at my reflection, questioning every choice, every movement, every gesture. Tears came unbidden, but this time they were different. Less about shame, more about the intensity of growth, the enormity of claiming a self that the world might not immediately recognize or accept. I whispered to the reflection, "I am allowed to be here. I am allowed to exist." And slowly, imperceptibly, the tears eased, leaving a quiet determination in their wake. The months of subtle, painstaking transformation culminated in a profound realization. I was no longer merely experimenting with identity or clothing. I had integrated the soft, deliberate grace of femininity into the very fabric of my being. My posture, gestures, voice, and even thoughts carried traces of this evolution. I was walking, speaking, existing as a layered, nuanced self, fragile yet resilient, cautious yet daring, uncertain yet authentically present. And in that realization lay a quiet power, an unshakable sense that I could face the world fully as the person I had become, no longer hiding, no longer shrinking, no longer denying the depth and validity of my own identity. And yet the journey was far from over. Challenges awaited, both internal and external, subtle and overt. The next steps would test my resilience, my courage, and the authenticity of the transformation I had fought so hard to cultivate. But as I looked into the mirror one last time that night, adjusting the soft fabric of a blouse that had become a second skin, I felt something I had never felt before. A deep, unshakable certainty that I could face whatever came next with both grace and courage, and that no shadow of doubt could erase the authenticity of the self I had claimed through patience, love, and relentless exploration. The early morning light filtered through the curtains like liquid gold, spilling across the floor and awakening a sense of possibility I had never felt before. I rose slowly, my body attuned to the smallest sensations, the brush of fabric against my skin, the subtle sway of a skirt I had worn countless times but still felt like discovery. In the mirror, I saw a reflection that had become increasingly familiar yet endlessly fascinating. My eyes lingered on the curve of my shoulders, the soft line of my jaw, the tilt of my neck, and I felt a warmth bloom inside me. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't pride in the shallow sense. It was recognition. Recognition that I was real, present, and undeniably myself. But recognition brought with it a new layer of tension. The world beyond my sanctuary demanded proof, not of my appearance, but of my courage, of my authenticity. Today, I was to meet people I had once feared would never accept this new self. Friends, acquaintances, even a few colleagues, all were gathering in a setting that felt both ordinary and monumental. My hands trembled as I dressed, each motion deliberate. Selecting the right blouse, smoothing the fabric over my chest, ensuring every crease and fold spoke of intention rather than improvisation. I checked my reflection repeatedly, adjusting a strand of hair here, a hem there, grounding myself in the delicate, familiar rituals that had become both armor and art. The walk to the gathering was electric with anticipation. Each step felt heavier and lighter at the same time, heavier with the weight of potential judgment, lighter with the exhilarating knowledge that I was finally inhabiting a self I had nurtured for months. The street stretched before me, the sunlight bouncing off the windows, casting fragmented reflections that danced like tiny reminders of the life I had left behind and the life I was stepping into. With each passing stranger, my heart raced and stilled, a rhythm both terrifying and thrilling. I could almost hear the whisper of my own courage, a pulse beneath the fear that urged me forward. Upon arrival, the gathering hummed with casual energy, conversations overlapping, laughter threading through the air. And then I was seen. Not just noticed, but truly seen. Eyes lifted, paused, and lingered, not in judgment, not in mockery, but in the subtle acknowledgement of someone fully present, fully claimed. My initial panic surged, a tidal wave of doubt threatening to undo months of careful preparation. But I anchored myself in the rhythm I had cultivated. Posture upright but relaxed, gaze steady but gentle, voice soft yet deliberate. Every gesture, every step, every subtle movement became a declaration. I existed here in this space, and I would not retreat. The interactions were complex, a tapestry of curiosity, hesitation, acceptance, and subtle tension. Friends I had once laughed with, colleagues I had casually nodded to, all navigated a delicate dance of recognition and adaptation. Some faltered, unsure how to respond. Others adjusted seamlessly, as though the transformation of myself was simply another facet of reality they had to accommodate. And I learned profoundly that the power of presence often outweighs words. A smile, a deliberate tilt of the head, the quiet strength of a hand gesture, these conveyed what explanations could not. Yet even amid the triumph, the emotional terrain was treacherous. Between conversations, I caught myself alone in reflection, watching my own gestures, my own expressions, and questioning their authenticity. Was this me, or a perfected version I had constructed for the world? The question hovered like a shadow, but instead of fear, I felt a quiet determination. Authenticity, I realized, was not perfection. It was persistence. It was the courage to exist fully, even when the world's reaction was uncertain. And slowly, imperceptibly, I began to integrate the public self with the private self, weaving together the fabric of identity into something resilient and whole. The turning point came unexpectedly. In a quiet corner, someone I had once feared would reject me approached. Their eyes searched, their smile tentative, and for a moment my heart seized. The pause stretched, charged with all the months of fear, experimentation, and self-discovery. And then they spoke, simply and warmly, acknowledging me not as a curiosity or a novelty, but as a person. In that instant, a weight I hadn't realized I carried lifted. Tears pricked my eyes, not from relief, not from validation, but from the sheer intensity of recognition. I was seen fully, and it was transformative. The evening continued, a delicate dance of social navigation and self-expression. I moved through the gathering with increasing ease, responding to conversations with confidence tempered by humility, laughter tempered by vulnerability. Each interaction, each small gesture, was a lesson in resilience and self-possession. I realized that my journey had never been about deception or performance. It had been about learning to inhabit a self I had long denied, to allow the world to witness me in all my complexity, to reconcile the inner landscape with the outer world. Returning home that night, I felt both exhaustion and elation. Alone in my room, the fabrics that had accompanied me through months of transformation seemed to hum with memory and power. I dressed in a simple blouse and skirt, ran my hands over the textures, and allowed myself to feel fully without reservation. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a stranger. It was a companion, a witness, a testament to months of struggle, exploration, and growth. I smiled quietly, reverently, and whispered to myself, "You are here. You are real. You are allowed." Sleep that night was profound yet restless. Dreams carried the echoes of past doubts, imagined judgments, and subtle triumphs. I walked through them as both observer and participant, navigating landscapes of identity, perception, and desire. And when I awoke, I realized that the transformation was no longer a series of experiments or social tests. It had become a lived reality. The body, the gestures, the voice, the movements, they were no longer borrowed or constructed. They were mine, inseparable from the self I had fought to recognize, cultivate, and accept. The final days of that chapter were a quiet revelation. I moved through the world with a measured grace, aware of the eyes around me but undeterred by them. I interacted with friends, family, colleagues with a confidence that was hard-won yet effortless in its authenticity. And in the quiet moments, alone with my thoughts, I acknowledged the enormity of the journey. Months of doubt, fear, experimentation, triumph, and subtle heartbreak had culminated in a profound reconciliation with myself. I was not perfect. I was not fully understood by the world, but I was real, present, and unafraid. In that final reflection, standing in my room with the soft fabrics draped around me, I understood a truth I had sought for months. Identity is not fixed. It is fluid, evolving, and fiercely personal. It is a tapestry woven from fear and courage, doubt and affirmation, vulnerability and resilience. And I had claimed it layer by layer, step by step, moment by moment. The soft sway of a skirt, the gentle curve of a blouse, the quiet power in a hand gesture, all of it was not just clothing or movement, but the visible manifestation of a self finally recognized and fully embraced. And as I lay down that night, the moon casting silver across the room, I felt an unprecedented serenity. The journey had been arduous, yes, filled with doubt and fear, yet it had also been luminous, exhilarating, and transformative. I was no longer merely experimenting. I was living fully, courageously, and authentically. And in that realization, I discovered a profound peace. I had become the self I had longed to meet, and that self was ready to step into the world, unafraid, unashamed, and fully alive. Morning light filtered gently through the curtains, spilling across my room in a quiet, golden hush. I sat on the edge of the bed, tracing the folds of a soft blouse I had worn countless times but still held a sense of reverence for. It was strange, almost surreal, to feel so completely at peace in a self I had once feared to inhabit. Months ago, this reflection would have been alien, terrifying even. Today, it was home. I ran my hands along the fabric, savoring the softness, the familiarity, the sense that every thread was now intertwined with my own story. I thought back to the very first moment I had tentatively touched my sister's clothes, that initial spark of curiosity that had set everything in motion. The memory felt distant and vivid at the same time. The nervous trembling of my fingers, the almost reverent pause before lifting a blouse, the gasp of recognition when I glimpsed my reflection. I remembered the fear, the exhilaration, the sense that stepping into those soft fabrics was stepping into an entirely unknown version of myself. And now, as I looked at my reflection, I realized that I had crossed the boundary from experimentation to full embodiment. I was no longer trying on an identity, I was living it. The world outside remained unpredictable, yet my approach had transformed. What had once been a source of anxiety, the glance of a stranger, the comment of a friend, the casual curiosity of an acquaintance, had become an opportunity for presence. I moved through the streets with grace and quiet confidence, aware of the rhythms of my gestures, the cadence of my voice, the sway of my skirts. Each step was deliberate, yet natural, a seamless integration of self and world. The soft fabrics, once alien, had become extensions of me, affirming my presence with each brush against skin, each movement of cloth. Even the small, intimate moments carried profound significance. I remembered walking through a quiet park, sunlight filtering through the trees, the gentle sway of my skirt in time with my heartbeat. I had paused to watch a leaf fall, and for the first time, I felt truly observed not by judgmental eyes, but by the quiet acknowledgement of the world itself. I had become both participant and witness in my own life, no longer hiding in shadows, no longer fearing the delicate intersections of identity, perception, and reality. And yet, the journey had not been without its quiet scars. There had been moments of doubt, flashes of fear, nights spent questioning my right to exist in this form. The reflection in the mirror sometimes betrayed me, showing a hesitation that no amount of clothing or posture could conceal. But each of those moments had taught resilience. Each moment of uncertainty had been a lesson in courage, a reminder that authenticity is forged in the tension between fear and desire. And now, I could face those doubts with the calm knowledge that they were threads in the tapestry of self, not obstacles to be conquered, but elements to be integrated. I thought of my sister, whose quiet guidance had been a lifeline, whose faith in me had never wavered even when my own did. I remembered the patience in her hands, the warmth in her voice, the subtle ways she had nudged me toward discovery without ever forcing me. She had been both anchor and compass, helping me navigate the treacherous waters of self-doubt, teaching me that strength could exist in softness, that power could exist in grace. And as I considered her role in my journey, I felt an overwhelming gratitude, not just for her support, but for the permission she had given me to explore, to fail, to rise again, and ultimately to thrive. The transformation had reshaped not just my appearance, but the very core of my perception. I had learned to inhabit space differently, to move with intention, to speak with clarity and resonance, to recognize the subtle interplay between self and world. I had discovered joy in the smallest details, the gentle brush of fabric over my skin, the sway of a skirt as I walked, the confidence that came from inhabiting a self I had once feared. Each day had become a meditation, a celebration, a proof that identity is not static but dynamic, evolving, and utterly personal. As evening fell, I sat by the window, the fading light casting gentle shadows across the room. I allowed myself a quiet reflection, letting the emotions of months past wash over me. Fear, exhilaration, doubt, triumph, shame, joy. All of it had been necessary, all of it had been real, and all of it had led me here, to a place of quiet, unshakable acceptance. I was no longer fragmentary, no longer hesitant, no longer hiding behind layers of fear or expectation. I was whole, fragile yet resilient, deliberate yet free. And in that quiet, luminous moment, I understood a truth I had sought through every trial, every reflection, every uncertain step. The self we fear to inhabit is often the self that is most real, most essential, most worthy of love and acknowledgement. I had discovered that truth not through magic or sudden revelation, but through patient exploration, persistent courage, and the gentle guidance of someone who saw me before I could see myself. I leaned back, feeling the soft fabric of my blouse against my skin, and smiled fully and unapologetically. The journey had been long, winding, and at times unbearably difficult, but it had been mine. Every trembling step, every anxious glance, every hesitant gesture had been a thread woven into the tapestry of my identity. And now, standing, or rather existing, in the quiet glow of self-recognition, I knew. I had arrived, not at perfection, but at authenticity. The world outside remained unpredictable, as it always would, but inside, I carried a certainty stronger than any fear. I was real, I was present, I was allowed. And that was enough.